birth of a continent. In the Middle Ages, a new world was forged upon the European continent. Kings and nobles, faith and warfare, culture and learning, trade and innovation. These would become the cornerstones of a civilization that laid the foundations of the modern era. This is the story of how Europe was born. Rome, faith, and the barbarians. In the first centuries of the Common Era, the Roman Empire ruled the Mediterranean with unmatched power. It was an age of prosperity and stability known as the Pax Romana. Roads, aqueducts, and law bound together peoples across vast distances, while Roman citizens enjoyed a flourishing culture and a rare sense of security. But in the far eastern provinces, a new faith was emerging. Born as a small Jewish sect, Christianity slowly spread across the pagan Roman world. By the 4th century, it was embraced by emperors themselves, transforming into the empire's official creed. Yet Rome was already in decline. Plagues, famine, economic strain, and relentless invasions weakened its core. The empire fractured in 395. Constantinople commanded the wealth of the East, while the West, poorer, more rural, and vulnerable, soon faltered. Beyond the frontiers, Germanic tribes gathered strength. Pressing upon the Rhine and Danube, they entered Roman lands as both allies and invaders. By 476, the young Emperor Romulus Augustulus was deposed by the warlord Odoacer. The Western Roman Empire was gone. The so-called Dark Ages had begun. Thus, three forces would shape the medieval world: the legacy of Rome, the rise of Christianity, and the migrations of the barbarians. The Germanic kingdoms. By the 6th century, the Western lands were carved into new kingdoms ruled by barbarian elites who had embraced Christianity. The Ostrogoths held Italy, the Visigoths ruled Spain, and the Franks established their realm in Gaul. Yet these kingdoms lacked the structures that had once sustained Rome. Cities emptied, roads crumbled, coins disappeared, and literacy declined. Without strong armies or administrators, peace gave way to a patchwork of fragmented lands, vulnerable to stronger neighbors. Heirs of Rome. In the East, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian sought to restore Rome's former glory. His armies briefly reconquered Italy, but new invaders, the Lombards, soon shattered those ambitions. Meanwhile, an even greater transformation was unfolding. In the 7th century, Arab armies swept across the Middle East and North Africa, building the vast Islamic Caliphate. A once unified Mediterranean world now split into three civilizations: Islamic, Byzantine, and medieval European. The Caliphate pushed into Spain and even raided into Francia, but in 732, at the Battle of Tours, Charles Martel of the Franks halted their advance. This victory gave birth to the Carolingian dynasty, a line that would redefine the destiny of Europe. The Carolingian Empire. Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, seized the Frankish crown and secured the Pope's favor by defeating the Lombards. His own son, Charlemagne, rose to become one of history's towering figures. Ruling from 768, Charlemagne spent decades expanding his realm until it encompassed most of Western Christendom. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned him Emperor of the Romans. 3 centuries after Rome's fall, the West had an emperor once again. Charlemagne's reign sparked a revival of learning and culture, known as the Carolingian Renaissance. His empire spread political institutions, noble titles, and, most importantly, the dream of a united Christian Europe. Fragmentation and invasion. But the Carolingian Empire proved fragile. Poor infrastructure, weak administration, and internal rivalries undermined its unity. After Charlemagne's death, his heirs divided the realm in 843, giving rise to the kingdoms that would become France and Germany. Almost immediately, Europe came under siege. Vikings swept in from the north, Magyars thundered from the east, and Muslim raiders struck from the south. Once more, the continent seemed on the edge of collapse. The rise of feudalism. In this age of crisis, kings lost power while local lords gained strength. Wooden castles sprang up across the countryside, fortresses from which nobles ruled their lands and exacted tribute from peasants. Warriors on horseback, knights equipped with stirrups and costly armor, became the masters of the battlefield. Power was bound not to states, but to networks of loyalty, lords and vassals tied together by land, service, and oaths. This was feudal Europe, fragmented, localized, and fragile. Centuries would pass before centralized kingdoms rose again. Changing tides. By the 10th century, the winds of fortune began to shift. A warmer climate brought abundant harvests, invasions subsided as Vikings and Hungarians settled into Christendom, and in some regions, kings began to reassert their authority. In Britain, Alfred the Great and his heirs united the Anglo-Saxon realms into a single kingdom, England. In West Francia, Norse raiders who had once terrorized the coasts accepted baptism and land, becoming the Normans. Their duchy stood as both a frontier and a bulwark. Further east, Otto I of Germany triumphed over the Hungarians at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955. His victory ended centuries of Eastern invasions, and the Hungarians themselves embraced Christianity, establishing their own kingdom. In 962, Otto was crowned emperor, reviving the imperial tradition in what came to be known as the Holy Roman Empire. After centuries of darkness, Europe was finding its balance once more, poised for growth and transformation. Growth. Around the year 1000, a turning point arrived. The next 3 centuries would be marked by expansion, innovation, and prosperity. Agricultural revolutions, from improved plows to new techniques, increased yields, swelling populations. Villages and towns spread into cleared forests and reclaimed fields. As food became abundant, trade revived, towns flourished, and a new class of merchants carved out urban independence from feudal lords. In Italy, merchant cities reconnected Europe to Mediterranean commerce, enriching both culture and coffers. Cathedrals soared skyward, music and art thrived, and learning returned. The first universities, under the patronage of the Church, nurtured scholars who recovered and expanded upon ancient knowledge. Europe was no longer merely surviving, it was rising. Expansion. As confidence grew, so too did ambition. Norman warriors crossed the Channel in 1066, and at Hastings, Duke William conquered England, reshaping it into a Norman kingdom. In Iberia, Christian rulers pushed southward against Muslim states, calling their campaign a Reconquista. In Sicily and southern Italy, Normans seized lands from Byzantines and Muslims, building yet another realm. To the east, German lords and peasants settled Slavic frontiers, extending Latin Christendom. And in 1095, Pope Urban II summoned Christian warriors to reclaim Jerusalem. The Crusades carved out fragile Latin states in the Levant, ultimately doomed but symbolically powerful. They marked the Catholic Church as a commanding force in European life. The Church. In the early Middle Ages, the papacy was weak, dominated by nobles and kings. Reformers of the 10th and 11th centuries sought to free the Church from worldly power and rebuild it as a spiritual monarchy. Pope Gregory VII clashed with Emperor Henry IV over the right to appoint bishops. Their struggle, the investiture controversy, saw Henry humbled at Canossa, but later striking back with force. Despite setbacks, the papacy emerged victorious. By the 12th century, the Church was a centralized, powerful institution ruled by the Pope like an absolute monarch. Kings could not help but envy and imitate such authority. Nobles and kings. Medieval kingship was long constrained by the warrior aristocracy. Castles dotted the countryside, while knights, guided by the ideals of chivalry, defined noble culture. Yet slowly, monarchs began to tip the balance. In England, the Anglo-Norman dynasty forged a relatively centralized realm. In Iberia, victories over Muslim states strengthened Christian crowns. In France, the Cape Tian kings expanded their personal holdings until they could wield genuine royal power. The Holy Roman Empire, by contrast, fractured into a patchwork of principalities. Frederick Barbarossa tried to restore imperial might, but the tide of history was against him. The emperor's title remained grand, but hollow. The Central Middle Ages were thus an age of agricultural prosperity, urban renewal, and growing royal and papal authority. Yet by the early 14th century, Europe faced a new crisis: the Black Death. In 1347, the plague arrived. Within a few short years, it claimed 1 in every 3 lives. Entire villages vanished, cities withered, and famine and fear spread across the continent. Though outbreaks recurred for centuries, Europe eventually recovered. For survivors, opportunities opened. With land abundant and labor scarce, peasants demanded better terms, workers sought higher wages. Resistance from elites sparked revolts, often crushed, but the tide of social change was unstoppable. Innovation thrived. Windmills and watermills, eyeglasses, improved metalworking, and, most transformative of all, the printing press reshaped society. In Italy, a Renaissance dawned, celebrating the wisdom of Greece and Rome while seeking to surpass it. Humanist scholars cast the previous millennium as a dark age and proclaimed themselves the heralds of a new era. Warfare and the state. Meanwhile, gunpowder was rewriting the rules of war. Cannons reduced castles to rubble, and infantry could fell even the most armored knight. Maintaining such armies required immense resources, and only kings could supply them. Thus monarchs consolidated power, transforming aristocrats into courtiers and administrators. Nation-states began to take shape. Wars tested these new structures. The 100 Years' War ravaged France, but figures like Joan of Arc turned the tide. England was eventually expelled from the continent. In Spain, the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella united crowns and culminated in the conquest of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold. France, England, and Spain emerged as sovereign kingdoms, while Italy and Germany remained divided, their unification postponed for centuries. The way ahead. By 1500, Europe had not only recovered from plague and crisis, but had been remade upon stronger foundations. Its gaze turned outward. Portugal reached the Indies by rounding Africa, while Spain crossed the Atlantic to the Americas. The voyages of Columbus and others symbolized more than exploration. They marked the close of the Middle Ages and the opening of the modern world. Europe, once fractured and fragile, was now poised to shape the globe.